What would you do if the person you trusted most shattered your world? My life seemed perfect until I discovered the unthinkable. My wife was having an affair with my brother-in-law. The betrayal ran deep, planned, and deliberate, leaving me to piece together the wreckage of my marriage and my trust. But this isn't just a story of heartbreak. It's about confronting the truth, reclaiming my power, and finding strength in the ashes. Join me as I unravel the lies, face the consequences, and rebuild a life worth living. This is a story of betrayal, justice, and a new beginning. I always thought my marriage was solid, unshakable even. Katia and I had built a life together that, on the surface, seemed enviable. We had our routines, our traditions, Friday movie nights, Sunday breakfasts. Yet, there was always this lingering feeling, a small whisper of doubt that I silenced, chalking it up to paranoia. That night, I stumbled across something that silenced my denial forever. A strange envelope with Dion's name on it lay hidden in the depths of Katia's desk. My heart raced as I hesitated, fingers trembling as I opened it. The contents were simple: hotel reservations, dated back years, but their meaning was anything but. I felt my entire body go cold as I pieced the puzzle together. Dion, my brother-in-law, and Katia, my wife. The dates, the locations, they overlapped with moments she claimed to be visiting her sister, Sonia. My legs buckled, and I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the damning evidence. My thoughts spiraled. How long? Why? What kind of person plans something like this? But beneath the shock, something darker stirred, an anger that I hadn't known I was capable of. I wasn't just betrayed. I had been played. I wanted to confront her immediately, to shove the envelope in her face and demand answers. But then I realized something. If I acted in haste, I'd give her a chance to twist the narrative, to lie her way out of it. No, I needed to be smarter. I placed the envelope back where I found it, careful to leave no trace, and spent the rest of the night in silence, pretending nothing had changed. Every glance she threw my way felt like a lie, every smile a dagger. Inside, though, a plan was forming. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to let this betrayal consume me. I would learn the whole truth, no matter how much it hurt, and I would ensure that they paid for what they had done. Quietly, methodically, I began to gather evidence, watching and listening with a new clarity. The life I thought I had was gone, but I wasn't about to let them rob me of everything else. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming control of my life, starting with the truth. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. I became a shadow in my own home, silent but observant. Katia was oblivious to my growing awareness, moving about her day as if everything was normal. Each smile she gave me, each affectionate word, felt like poison. I sifted through her phone when she was asleep, her emails, her calendar, anything that might connect the dots. I felt like a stranger in my own house, trapped in a labyrinth of lies, and every new discovery was another knife in my back. It wasn't long before the evidence stacked up. There were messages disguised as harmless conversations with Dion, always coded but unmistakably intimate. Shared inside jokes, mentions of places only they had visited, like breadcrumbs leading me deeper into their web. The final blow came when I found old photos on her cloud storage, candid shots of them together, laughing in ways I hadn't seen Katia laugh with me in years. Their affair wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was calculated, deliberate, and cruel. As I unraveled the extent of their betrayal, a new name kept appearing: Sonia, Katia's sister, and Dion's wife. She was unknowingly part of their game, just like me. My heart ached at the thought of what this would do to her, but I couldn't deny the small comfort of knowing I wasn't alone in this nightmare. I debated telling her, imagining her devastation, but the timing didn't feel right. I needed to fully understand the scope of their betrayal before I brought her into this storm. I was living two lives now, pretending to be the devoted husband while secretly preparing for the inevitable confrontation. My focus became razor-sharp. I documented everything: screenshots, saved messages, and financial records. It wasn't just about catching them. It was about ensuring that when I confronted them, there would be no escape. Each new piece of evidence fueled my resolve. They had taken something precious from me, but I would make sure they couldn't destroy me. If anything, they would destroy themselves. The confrontation came sooner than I had anticipated. One evening, I came home earlier than usual, finding the house quieter than it should have been. Something felt off. Kadia's car was in the driveway, but the lights in the living room were dim. My chest tightened as I moved toward the sound of muffled voices coming from our bedroom. I didn't need to open the door to know who was inside, but I did it anyway. There they were, Kadia and Dion, caught in the act. The shock on their faces, the stammering excuses that spilled from their lips were almost comical. Kadia scrambled to cover herself, while Dion tried to stand as if dignity was still an option for him. My rage boiled over, but I didn't yell or lunge at them. I simply stood there, holding the envelope of evidence I had collected. "I know everything," I said, my voice calm but cold. "And so will everyone else." Kadia tried to speak, her voice shaking with desperation, but I silenced her with a single hand raised. "Save it," I snapped, finally letting some of my fury show. "You made your choices. Now, you'll face the consequences." Dion didn't even bother to defend himself. He stood frozen, pale, and visibly panicked. I could almost see the gears in his head turning as he tried to calculate how much he had to lose. His career, his reputation, his marriage. For the first time, I felt like I was in control. The confrontation ended with their silence and my exit. I left the room, leaving them to wallow in their disgrace, and drove aimlessly through the city for hours. My thoughts were a hurricane of anger, sadness, and a strange sense of liberation. The truth was out, and though it hurt, it was also a relief. I wasn't living in the dark anymore. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I would rebuild, and they would live with the ruins they created. The next morning, I made the hardest call of my life. Sonia deserved to know the truth, but I dreaded the pain it would bring her. My hands shook as I dialed her number, and when she picked up, her cheerful hello almost made me hang up. How could I destroy her world with a few words? But I reminded myself that she was already living in a lie, just like I had been. The truth was painful, but it was necessary. "Sonia," I started, my voice heavy with hesitation. "I need to tell you something, and it's gonna hurt. It's about Kadia and Dion." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, followed by a quiet, trembling, "What is it?" I could hear the tension in her voice, the fear of what was coming. I explained everything, the messages, the photos, and finally, what I had walked in on the night before. Each word felt like a blow, not just to her, but to me, reliving the betrayal all over again. She didn't say much as I spoke, only quiet sobs breaking the silence. When I finished, she asked through tears, "Are you sure? Maybe it's a misunderstanding." I wished I could tell her otherwise, but the evidence was irrefutable. "I'm sorry," I said, my own voice cracking. "I wish I was wrong, but you deserve to know the truth." There was no anger in her response, just raw pain and disbelief. I gave her space to process, offering my support without pressing her for more. Later that day, Sonia called back. She sounded calmer, though her voice was still strained. "Thank you for telling me," she said, and I could hear the weight of exhaustion in her tone. "I don't know what I'm going to do, but at least now I know." That conversation marked the start of an unexpected bond between us. Two people who had been betrayed by the people we trusted most. Though we were both shattered, we found solace in not having to face the fallout alone. After my conversation with Sonia, we decided to meet in person. The weight of our shared pain felt unbearable, but sitting across from her in that small cafe, it became clear that we both needed this. Her eyes were swollen, her hands trembling as she clutched her coffee cup. "I feel like I don't even know who I married," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, understanding her disbelief all too well. "Neither do I," I replied, "but they're not getting away with this." We spent hours sharing our stories, piecing together the lies we had both been fed. Sonia, who was always so composed, couldn't hold back her anger. "They've humiliated us," she said, her voice shaking with fury. But they won't get to control the narrative. Her determination was contagious. We weren't just victims of their betrayal. We were partners in reclaiming our lives. We agreed to move carefully, not out of vengeance, but to protect what was rightfully ours. The first step was practical, securing our finances and assets. Dion had been pushing Sonia to sell a family property, which now seemed more like a calculated move than a genuine financial decision. I shared my own concerns about a similar scheme involving Katia. Together, we reviewed documents, contacted lawyers, and put safeguards in place to ensure neither of them could manipulate us further. It was empowering to take action, even as the emotional toll weighed heavily on us both. But this wasn't just about logistics. It was about confronting the pain head-on and ensuring that they faced the consequences of their choices. Sonia and I decided we would confront them together, not in anger, but with undeniable proof and a clear message. Their betrayal would not define us. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sense of clarity. They had tried to tear us down, but we were stronger than they realized. The day of the confrontation arrived like a storm cloud hanging over us. Sonia and I met at her house, both of us tense but resolute. "Are you ready for this?" I asked her as we stood by the door. She nodded, her jaw set in determination. Together, we called Katia and Dion, asking them to meet us under the pretense of a casual family discussion. It was a lie, yes, but far less damaging than the web of deceit they'd spun around us. When they arrived, it was clear they weren't expecting what we had planned. Katia smiled nervously at me, her gaze flickering to Sonia as if sensing that something was off. Dion, ever the actor, greeted us with a confident grin, but his charm was wasted here. "Sit down," Sonia said firmly, her voice leaving no room for argument. They complied, their unease growing as we placed the evidence, printed messages, photos, and legal documents, on the table between us. For the first time, they were cornered. Katia's face paled, and Dion shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "What is this?" Katia stammered, trying to maintain her composure. "This," I said, pointing to the pile, "is everything you thought you could hide from us. Every lie, every betrayal." Sonia leaned forward, her voice sharp as glass. "You didn't just betray us. You betrayed our family, our trust. And for what? A cheap affair that you thought would never come to light." The room was heavy with silence as they tried to come up with excuses, but there was nothing they could say. Katia began to cry, pleading for forgiveness, while Dion sat stone-faced, his arrogance evaporating. Sonia and I didn't waver. We laid out the steps we had already taken: legal measures, financial protections, and our decision to sever ties. The confrontation wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about reclaiming our power. As we walked away, leaving them to face the wreckage they had created, I felt a sense of closure begin to form. It wasn't over yet, but this was a start. In the days that followed the confrontation, the fallout began to ripple through our lives. Katia moved out of the house almost immediately, unable to face me or the memories that now haunted our home. Her once confident demeanor was replaced by a quiet desperation, though I refused to let her guilt sway me. Meanwhile, Dion's world started crumbling as whispers of his betrayal spread through his professional network. It wasn't long before he lost a key client, a direct result of his tarnished reputation. Sonia and I supported each other as we navigated the chaos. She moved into her parents' house temporarily, avoiding Dion entirely. "It feels like everything I knew is gone," she told me during one of our late-night phone calls. I felt the same, like a rug had been pulled out from under my life, leaving me standing on unsteady ground. But in those moments, we reminded each other that while we couldn't change the past, we had control over what came next. I threw myself into the practical tasks of rebuilding. Selling the house was my first step. It was too full of memories I couldn't bear to face. The process was painful but necessary, and each box packed felt like a small step toward freedom. I also started therapy, something I had resisted for years, and found that talking through the betrayal helped me unpack the anger and sadness that had been weighing me down. Slowly but surely, I felt the pieces of my life coming back together. Sonia, too, found her way forward. She returned to work, pouring her energy into her career and leaning on friends for support. We spoke often, and each conversation felt like a lifeline. Through shared pain, we developed a deep bond, one that was built on honesty and mutual respect. While neither of us was ready to think about what the future might hold, we found comfort in knowing we weren't alone in the process of healing. As weeks turned into months, the storm began to settle. Though the pain of betrayal still lingered, I found myself slowly rediscovering who I was outside of the life I had shared with Katia. Moving to a new city became a turning point. It wasn't just about leaving behind the memories. It was about creating space to build something new. I accepted a job offer that required relocation, packed my belongings, and set out for a fresh start. The drive felt like shedding an old skin mile by mile. The new city was unfamiliar but refreshing. I found a small apartment overlooking a park, a quiet retreat where I could reflect and heal. Every morning, I'd sit by the window with my coffee, watching the world go by, grateful for the simple peace I had reclaimed. I started making new connections, cautiously letting people into my life again. Slowly, the isolation that betrayal had imposed on me began to lift. Each new friendship felt like a reminder that life could still hold joy and connection. Sonia and I stayed in touch, though the distance added a natural separation to our conversations. She was thriving in her own way, finding empowerment in her independence. "You were right," she said during one of our calls. "This isn't the life I wanted, but it's the one I needed to find myself again." Her strength inspired me. We had both been shattered, but now we were rebuilding, not as victims, but as people who had survived and learned. The most surprising discovery was how much lighter I felt without the weight of resentment. Therapy had taught me that forgiveness wasn't for Katia or Dion. It was for me. I wasn't ready to forgive them entirely, but I was ready to let go of the bitterness that had held me back. My new life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The road ahead was still unwritten, but I finally had the pen in my hand. The turning point came unexpectedly, a quiet moment that brought everything into focus. Months after the confrontation, Katia reached out to me through a brief email. She wanted to meet, claiming she needed to apologize in person. I debated for days, unsure if reopening that wound would help or hinder my healing. Eventually, curiosity won out. I agreed, but I approached the meeting cautiously, determined not to let her manipulate my emotions. When we met in a small cafe, she looked nothing like the confident woman I had once loved. Her eyes were heavy, her demeanor subdued. She stumbled through her apology, admitting that her actions had been selfish and cruel. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, her voice cracking, "but I wanted you to know how much I regret everything." I listened, but I felt strangely detached. Her regret didn't undo the pain, nor did it absolve her, but it wasn't mine to carry anymore. Dion's downfall was even more dramatic. Rumors about his affair with Katia had spread beyond our immediate circles, affecting his standing in both his personal and professional lives. A business partner dropped him, citing a lack of trust, and he eventually moved out of town to escape the scrutiny. It was poetic justice, but by then I no longer felt the need to celebrate his losses. They were simply the natural consequences of choices he had made. For me, that chapter was closing. Meeting with Katia and hearing about Dion's struggles didn't bring me joy or closure. It simply reminded me that I had already moved forward. I left the cafe that day feeling lighter, as if the last remnants of their betrayal had finally slipped from my shoulders. The past no longer defined me. I was ready to embrace the present and whatever the future had in store. The first anniversary of my new life came quietly, with little fanfare, but a deep sense of gratitude. I woke up that morning, looked around my modest apartment, and smiled. It wasn't about what I had gained materially, but what I had reclaimed emotionally myself. The betrayal that once shattered me now felt like a distant storm, a memory of a time when I thought my world revolved around someone else. Now, my world revolved around me, and that was enough. Work had become a sanctuary of sorts. My new job challenged me in ways I hadn't expected, pushing me to grow professionally and personally. I found myself rising to those challenges with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. Colleagues became friends, and for the first time, I felt a sense of community. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving, building a life that felt both authentic and fulfilling. Sonia and I still kept in touch occasionally, though our conversations had shifted. They were no longer about the pain we'd endured, but about the lives we were building. She had found her own version of happiness, carving out a path that was uniquely hers. "It's funny," she said during one of our last calls, "how something so devastating can push you towards something so good." I couldn't agree more. We had both found strength in each other and then moved forward stronger for the journey. As the day wound down, I went for a walk in the park near my apartment, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot. I paused by a bench and sat, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and gold. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. The betrayal that had once defined my story was now just a chapter, a lesson that led me here. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.